All right, hey guys, today we're going to talk about returning multiple values in Python. So you probably want to know how to return multiple values in Python if you're watching this video, or you just thought it looked like an interesting video to watch. Maybe you already know how to do this. So there's multiple different ways you could do this. You could you can use a tuple, a named tuple, a list, a dict, or a class object, or you could use a data class. So we're going to show you how to do all of those different methods today. So I have some little code snippets, and we're gonna look over how you can do this. So let's take a look at the first one. We're going to try tuple. So this is the code. Basically, you have a little function, and it returns a tuple. Now we didn't actually define it in a named variable. We're just returning these three variables separated by commas, which creates a tuple. We could have just as well assigned those valuables to, or those values to a variable and returned it. It's the same thing though. Anyways, call our function, assign it to a data variable, and then print it all out. You can index them by number, like 0, 1, and 2, just like a regular list, because it's a tuple, and that's just how tuples work. So basically, if you want to return three values, if you want to return multiple values in Python, you basically just you don't actually specify separate values to return. You're not really specifying three values that you want to return. You're returning one value, and that one value is a tuple, which contains other values. So that's the idea here. So the other thing you can do is actually you can call that same function. It returns a tuple, but instead of assigning it to a single variable called data, or whatever you want to call it, you can assign it to three separate variables, and it gets split up like that. And we can print it out, and it'll actually show that we have it's a neat little trick. It'll print out the exact same thing as we did in the line a few lines above that. So let's give that a shot. So we are going to run, let's see here. Let's see, the tuple example is right here. All right, run it, and you can see red, green, blue for both of them. So they both give you the same thing. All right, so that's our first example. So that's using a tuple. Now that's the most common way people will tell you how to do it. Normally people just do that. The another way, probably a better way to do this, is to use a named tuple, which is kind of like is kind of like using a dictionary. So like a tuple is similar to a list. A named tuple is similar to a dictionary, or a hash, or whatever you want to call it. In Python, it's a dictionary. Anyways, a named tuple, we'll take a look at this example. It's basically almost the exact same thing, except you have to import named tuple from collections, and you have to create a named tuple. We could have actually done this right here in our, see, we're actually creating a named tuple and assigning it to this variable and then returning it. Yeah, so we created the named tuple with these different names. This first line creates actually the type of this variable of retval will actually, if you run a type on it, it'll say color is the type. And then this second string is separated by white space. So down, up, and neutral are the three keys that you can index this named tuple by. So we actually don't use this type the type color again at all in this code, but you could. Anyways, return retval. This is in one line we basically return it, but we're also assigning the actual values. So the words down, up, and neutral are the keys, and then red, green, and blue are the actual values getting assigned to this named tuple. So we're assigning those three values and returning it all in one shot, which is I mean, we could have separated that out, but we didn't. Anyway, we call the function get data and assign it to a variable, then we print it out. So let's give this a shot. It should give us the exact same output. So let's see, here's our named tuple demo right here. Named tuple and red, green, blue, exactly as we expected, gives us the same output. All right, let's see, what are we going to do next? Let's do list. List is almost the exact same thing as a tuple, except it's mutable. You can change it. So we have another function called getData. We assign a list of 3 strings, red, green, and blue, to a variable, and then we return that variable. Now we could have, instead of assigning to the variable, we could have just taken this list and just returned to the list directly instead of using a variable, but we didn't. Anyway, and it doesn't matter. Anyways, we call getData, assign it to a variable, and print it out, indexing it by number. So we're not indexing it by name or anything, indexing it by number. So let's see, test list. Let's try running this, and we know what it's going to give us, but let's see here, test list. And there we go, red, green, blue, exactly what we expected. So moving right along here, let's see. Let's look at our dictionary example. Whoops. I went right past it, didn't I? Nope, I did not. All right, let's see. Test. Did I? Yeah, I did. Yeah, here we go. All right, so dictionary example. Similar to the name tuple, slightly different syntax. It's a little bit more straightforward. Honestly, if I wanted to name something, I would probably do it this way, because I don't care if it can be written later. I mean, I guess if you do that, you have to start worrying about scope and if you're modifying it later. But if you're not planning on modifying these values later, then no big deal, I guess. This is, you don't have to import anything, and it's a little bit more straightforward than a named tuple, although the named tuple is the preferred way to do it. So anyways, you see here, we have our function. We say sum data, that's our variable that we assign our dictionary to. Our dictionary has keys and values. So the keys are down, up, and neutral. The values are red, green, and blue. Then we return that variable. So we're basically returning a variable, which is we're returning one thing, but that variable contains a bunch of other things, which are all the multiple values we want to return. So moving along here, we call the function, assign it to a variable, and print it out, indexing not by an index number, but by an actual string. We're indexing it by the keys that we defined above. So let's test this out. So let's see here, dict, and boom, there we go. All right, red, green, blue, exactly how it's supposed to be. No surprises there. And let's see. Moving right along here. All right, so let's see. We did dictionary. Now let's do a class or object. We're going to return an object, which is an instance of a class. Let's see here. Class CL. How did I name this? I probably called it. Yeah, there we go. And yeah, so you can see here we first define a class. And then we define the constructor right here. The constructor, you pass 3 values, down, up, and neutral. These parameters then get assigned to instance variables, which are going to be for every object you create based on this class. They'll each have their own copy of these instance variables. So assign all those parameters to those instance variables, and you're good to go. So that's our class definition right there. Now outside of our class, we have this function. This function is not a member of the class. It's separate from the class. Inside this function, getData, we create an instance of the class. Now when we create the instance of the class, we pass 3 strings to the constructor, red, green, and blue. And we assign that to a variable. So this variable would be an object, or at least this is how objects and classes work in Java. So we're doing Python, and I think the terminology is a little bit different. I'm coming more from a Java background originally, so I always think of things in terms of how object-oriented programming works in Java. But anyways, it's the same idea. It's the same thing in Python. It may as well be the same thing in Python. So anyway, moving right along, we return that object. So basically, we just create a new object, initialize it with the values that we wanted to have, and we return the object. We're returning one object with all the values that we want. So then we call that function, assign it to a variable, which is going, now that variable is going to hold that object that we just returned. We return the object, assigned it to a variable, so now that variable holds the object, and now we print it out. And we can access them like this, like the data, the name of the object, dot down for a member of the object, or dot up or dot neutral to access the named variables within that object. Now let's give this a shot. We know it's going to work, but let's try it anyways. Let's see here. Test class. All right. Python 3 test class and red, green, blue. Exactly what we thought it would be. So moving along, exit out of here, and now we're going to try a data class. Now, I had never actually heard of these before, but until recently, but I guess this is a new thing introduced in Python 3.7. I don't think it's incredibly necessary, but it's another way to do the same thing, and anyways, yeah, you can read more about data classes and why they're great, but we're gonna give our quick demo on this anyway. So data class. All right, so data class is a little bit different. You basically create a class. You use this little annotation thing here to tell you that it's a data class. That's some weird syntax, but that's how it's done. You have to import data class, which is a little inconvenient, but no big deal. It's not just built in. And then you create a class. You're defining a class like this, and then you just define these variables like that. And let's see here. After this, we say get data, return. We basically create an instance of this data class or an object, red, green, and blue, assign them to X and return X. We could have just directly returned it without assigning it to a variable, but we didn't. Anyway, data equals get data. So we call our function, which returns an instance of the class, and we assign that instance of the class or object to this data variable. Now we can access it the same way we did with a regular class, data.down, data.up, and data.neutral. So let's try this out. Python 3 test data class and red, green, blue. There we go. So I actually forget how I had gone about installing, running this example on a MacBook Pro. I forget how I even got Java installed initially, how I got Python installed initially, or if it was already there. But I had Python 2 by default, and Python 3 I have if you call it Python 3 instead of just saying Python. So if I say Python, I get Python 2, Python 3, I get Python 3. I forget how I got to that configuration, but that's how it is right now. So that's getting a little bit off topic, but there you go. Now you know. So now you know 6 different ways of returning multiple values in Python. So if you're writing Python and want to return multiple values, that's a whole bunch of different ways to do the exact same thing. Normally people will just use a tuple. A list is just fine also. If you have something really elaborate, probably a class. So there you go. That's it. Thanks for watching. Hopefully this was useful if this is what you were looking for. And if you found this useful, feel free to give me a thumbs up, like this video, or give me a thumbs down if you thought this was stupid or a waste of your time. Make sure to give me a thumbs down too, whatever you think is appropriate. Leave comments telling me how great this video is, how much it helped you, or if you think it was bad, tell me what your criticism is. I'd like to hear everything everyone has to say. If you thought it was terrible or a waste of time, or if I made a mistake, feel free to point those mistakes out and tell me what you like or dislike about this video. If you want to see more videos like this, subscribe. And you can also hit the alert button, because that's what people ask other people to do when they make YouTube videos. I never hit the alert button when I subscribe. I usually just subscribe to the channels I like, never hit the alert button, but feel free to hit the alert button so you'll see every time I put a new video out, depending on how much you like this video. But yeah, definitely subscribe and like. Thanks for watching, and hopefully we'll see you watching again